Hello, thank you. Welcome back, everyone, from the coffee break. So it is my pleasure to open the first panel today. We have 3 presentations on reimagining the museum from 3 outstanding museum professionals in Canada and New Zealand. I'll just introduce all 3 of them really quickly, and then we'll hear from all 3 presentations, and then afterwards we'll have a round of questions. So the first speaker will be Dr. Arapata Hakiwai, who is the Maori co-leader of the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa. The title of his presentation is Owning the Past to Create a Better Future, Our Ongoing Journey of Decolonization, Hope, and Aspiration. The second speaker is Stephen Boris, the director and CEO of the Winnipeg Art Gallery and Kaumayok in Winnipeg, Canada, which is an Inuit art center. His presentation is entitled Kaumayok, a New Model for the Museum in the South. And the third presenter is Sean Young, who is manager and curator of collections and lab of archaeology at Salindanai Saving Things Place, which is a museum in Haida Gwaii, in what is now known as Canada. The title of his talk is Decolonizing Museum Practices at Salindanai Saving Things Places. Maybe just a few words that following Bruno's excellent keynote this morning, I think that the next 3 speakers will really build on Bruno's presentation this morning, and really show how certain museums are making it work and building a path towards the museum of the future. So I will now let the presentations roll. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou kei ngā mana, kei ngā reo, kei ngā ihi, kei ngā whakamataku. Mai te whenua o Aotearoa, he mihi ake ki te whenua, me ngā iwi o haina, hoi no rā, kei ngā maunga, kei ngā awa, kei ngā mana o ngā tāngata maha o te ao, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Can I first acknowledge all the museums, universities and thought leaders present as part of this important global conversation on museums, decolonisation and restitution. I greet the International Museum Research and Exchange Centre IMREC in partnership between ICOM and the Shanghai University in organising and hosting this significant event. I greet the people in whenua of China, along with the many people, cultures, mountains and rivers present, both in person and online. I greet you all from Aotearoa, New Zealand, tēnā koutou katoa. It's both an honour and privilege to be here today to share some insights on New Zealand's National Museum, the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa, or Te Papa. My name is Dr. Arapata Hakiwai, and I've worked at Te Papa for over 25 years. I'm the Kaihautū or Māori co-leader, and along with the Chief Executive and Tumu Whakarai Courtney Johnston, I share the bicultural leadership of our National Museum. The unique shared leadership structure was an intentional directive and tangible expression of the bicultural aspiration that formed the creation of Te Papa, which opened in February 1998. I accepted the invitation to speak here today because I love my culture, I love my language, and I want this to continue for my children, their children, and those generations yet unborn. We know that museums can play an important role in the maintenance and revitalisation of culture and identity. And to say we museums are at the crossroads is an understatement. There are real challenges ahead of us, and we need to have courage and commitment to do something about it. The impact and legacy of colonisation and Western imperialism is real and in front of us. Our museums have thousands of cultural treasures that remain connected to their source communities, but distanced and alienated from them. Museums are being challenged by their own fraternity and by the peoples and communities they serve. Some are meeting the challenges of our contemporary society, becoming relevant, more engaged and more meaningful, but many do not want to change. They are content to perpetuate dinosaurian traditions and practices that are racist and privileged class and Western culture. Museums must be more than passive repositories that hold vast collections of objects and treasures of cultures and peoples throughout the world. The responsibilities and indeed obligations of museums with respect to the collections they hold and the voices and knowledge systems they present require a new consciousness, a new paradigm, an openness and courage to own their past, to embrace themselves for a better future. This symposium is very timely, and I'm honoured to be able to share the experiences that we've gone through and to continue to go through as New Zealand's National Museum. For us who care for our cultural treasures, curate exhibitions, and carry out research and events, we need to critically reflect and look at ourselves and our museum practice. Reimagining the museum has been the focus of many museums in recent times. Why? Because we know that many museums have not served the interests of their communities and cultures well. They have denied the vitality of life and agency to the communities whose treasures they care for. They have not acknowledged or recognized the continuing living relationships regarding the treasures and their peoples and cultures. They have not been open and honest in acknowledging the impact and legacy of their colonial histories and stifling museum practices and traditions. We know that museums have not served Indigenous and First Nation peoples well. They have denied agency, involvement, and participation. For the most part, we have been on the outside looking in. Like many other museums in New Zealand, our National Museum was strongly colonial in its history and operation. It's no surprise that many of our large museums were formed during the time of the New Zealand Wars in the 1840s to 1870s. Museums like our National Museum were colonial constructs of the highest magnitude, where directors and staff actively contributed to the taking of our taonga and actively involved in the exchange and trade of our ancestral remains, our ancestors. The context of these were largely salvage anthropology, with Pākehā or non-Māori in control of our cultural heritage. Our National Museum missed a great opportunity to play an important role in enhancing our nation's sense of history, identity, and belonging. It was this context that created the desire for the new National Museum. Dating back to 1865, our old National Museum did not serve the interests of its communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand very well. The buildings were old, run down, and too small, and its museum practices were outdated, Western-oriented, and elitist. It was colonial in its look and colonial in its operation and management. Being formed with a colonial natural history focus, Māori were often presented as an exotic and primitive people. The building and collection storage areas were substandard. The Māori taonga or treasures were stored in appalling conditions. And although there did exist some relationships with Māori, by and large, the National Museum did not engage, collaborate, or partner actively with Māori to any great extent. It was stifling museum practice at its worst. The nation didn't want a blueprint of the old, and Māori certainly wanted something far different. Te Papa was a deliberate disruption. Right from the start, there were issues on the sharing of power and decision-making, of recognising mana and authority, of giving voice and empowerment to our communities. Creating and sustaining enduring, meaningful relationships was essential to our bicultural ethos. Building trust and respect with Māori takes time and is born out of showing mutual respect and doing the right things. In mapping a vision for the future, there was a strong resolve and determination to create a unique museum practice informed and shaped by Te Ao Māori, the Māori world. This journey was radically different from any other museum in the world, and today continues to evoke awe and respect from the international museum community. Arguably, however, it was Māori Indigenous agency that inspired and activated change and creative innovation, challenging accepted museum practice and reinventing the National Museum as a place of meaning and belonging. Te Papa our place. Dare to dream, dare to challenge, dare to change. To understand the dramatic change and transformation that our National Museum went through is to understand the history that led to Te Papa's founding vision and concept. Our museum grew largely out of what was happening in the 1980s, as this was an important time in our nation's history. Some of these events included the following. The Treaty of Waitangi Act established the Waitangi Tribunal as a commission of inquiry to hear Māori grievances against the Crown concerning breaches of the treaty. From 1985, the Waitangi Tribunal was empowered to investigate breaches, to investigate treaty claims dating back to 1840. The Māori Language Act came into force in 1987. The Kohanga Reo National Trust for Early Māori Education is established, along with the first Kohanga Reo or Māori Language Nest programs. The first Māori University is established, and the Te Karere Māori News program airs on television. There was a new and vibrant period of political rights for language and land rights. Te Papa had to dream and challenge itself to reimagine something far greater than what it was. Te Papa reflected on its historical past and challenged itself over and over again on what it was doing and what it should be doing. It critiqued itself and pursued a pathway that it knew was unique in its Indigenous positioning and transformational with its community empowerment. We also looked overseas at what other great museums were doing to help shape and inform ours, as well as having a powerful group of international museum directors to assist our process. The Te Māori exhibition of 1984 to 87 that travelled to the Met in New York, St. Louis, San Francisco, and Chicago, then back to the main centres of New Zealand, was a landmark and seminal event in our nation's history. A Māori exhibition comprising 184 treasures to Māori signalled to the world that our treasures were still connected to our Māori people and culture. This exhibition was the first time where Māori had real involvement in the exhibition process, and its success was noted by our politicians, officials, and Māoridom. The Te Māori exhibition shook up our museum sector as it questioned museum-iwi relationships and issues around interpretation, governance, power, and control. Te Māori was transformational, and it awoke the spirit of our ancestors in different shores and stirred the imagination and minds of those working in museums. Its influence and legacy was profound. It changed the lives of people in museums. It involved our people in ways never before undertaken, and it said to the world, here are our taonga, and we are its people. It was described as a journey and voyage of rediscovery. And being navigators, that was something very natural for us. The exhibition challenged those who managed and controlled our taonga, and in a highly visible way highlighted the inadequacies of museum-Māori relations. Te Māori signalled a turning point, no turning back, a time for museums to examine and change the way they do things, the way they operate. This is why Te Papa was created. This is why our National Museum had to transform itself. This is why our nation wanted something far better than a museum that did little in the lives of our people. The success of this exhibition was an important impetus for a new National Museum based on active community engagement, participation, and recognition of living relationships and cultural knowledge. Te Papa was built as a site of decolonisation, hope, and aspiration. It knew that our former National Museum had privileged class and Western culture and denied agency, representation, and meaningful relationships with Māori. To this end, the Karanga Aotearoa repatriation program was created in 2003, where a dedicated team was formed with both government and Māori mandated support to negotiate and undertake the return of Māori and Moriori ancestral remains held in overseas museums and institutions. Addressing our dark colonial past was important for our new National Museum, and the establishment of the Karanga Aotearoa repatriation program in 2003 was a direct response to owning and addressing the colonial history and actively working towards healing our future. Māori knew that our ancestors were traded sold and exchanged throughout the world, and in the early consultations, Māori tribes wanted the government to do something about it. Reimagining the museum was deliberate, and Māori were involved in creating this transformation and difference. Māori tribes carried their carvings from the old museum to the new museum before Te Papa opened, and this was symbolic of being away with the old and welcoming in with the new. As a sign of decolonisation, we knew that we had to do a lot of things to rebalance, reset, and reimagine. Honouring and recognising the mana of Indigenous knowledge, not as an exotic, other or primitive people, but as a valid and knowledge tradition with mana and integrity, was deliberate in our planning. Te Papa, in its exhibitions, research and events, has always recognised and promoted Indigenous knowledge. Not having Māori involved in the decision-making process also led to new structures and policies that gave mana to our National Museum. Te Papa was very deliberate in its critical examination of itself and its operations. As Amy Lone Tree reminds us, critical analysis is an important dimension of a site for decolonisation. Te Papa has always done this, and we continue to do this, as we know that museum practice is forever changing. There were many tribal gatherings, meetings, and reflections during this time. The principles and pillars that were required for the new National Museum challenged the old museology and gave confidence for the future. How do we recognise and give affirmation to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, our nation's founding document? How can we involve our communities in everything we do? How can Te Papa be a bicultural museum with active Māori participation? How can we recognise the Māori world and knowledge traditions? Returning ancestral remains and taonga prized treasures to their descendant communities is both addressing the injustices of the past and supporting the vitality of living contemporary cultures. There was courage and commitment to go where we haven't gone before. Te Papa is well known for its bicultural mandate, its scholarship, its innovation and fun, and the success for this has been built on relationships and actively working with our many communities. Perpetuating the past and blindly following policies and practices that do little for the maintenance and revitalisation of Māori culture serves no meaningful purpose at all. In fact, it's a modern form of recolonisation that further disenfranchises and alienates. If we put our communities and peoples at the centre, we know that we can focus on things that matter a lot. Having innovative strategies and practices that speak uniquely about who we are, what we do, why we do it, and how we do it is important. We must think more about what we can become rather than what we are now. The process of imagination is powerful because it allows us to step outside the boundaries we know so well and are familiar with, to think about what museums could become. Te Papa's vision was about what we could become rather than accept what we were. The change and difference of this planned new museum was poignantly stated in many of the guiding documents, to provide a new opportunity to care for and look after Māori taonga or treasures. Biculturalism at Te Papa is the foundation on which we celebrate the natural and cultural diversity of Aotearoa New Zealand. Biculturalism at Te Papa acknowledges the unique position of Māori in Aotearoa and ensures an integral Māori participation in the governance, management, and operation of Te Papa. Statements like this were further reinforced with the museum's bicultural policy, which set guiding principles that affirm the right for Māori to manage their taonga in the most appropriate way. Te Papa's concept also stated that we will honour the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. The bicultural partnership is based on the three key treaty principles of partnership, participation, and protection. The partnership is also founded on three key Māori concepts, rangatiratanga, kāwanatanga, and kaitiakitanga, that help define the nature of our relationships within Te Papa and within our external communities. Decolonisation is putting something right that should have been done many, many years ago. Museums can and should have courage to do the right thing. But what is the right thing? Why should we put up with the way things are? Why shouldn't we decolonize our museums? Why shouldn't we reconnect the treasures we hold to their source communities? There are no valid reasons why we shouldn't. Culture and identity are at the centre of all the Treaty of Waitangi claims in New Zealand, and this immediately puts into focus the value and importance of museums. Why? Our taonga continue to form the very foundations of Māori tribal identity and history. There is an undeniable responsibility for museums to be something far greater and meaningful to the living cultures than just accumulating and amassing vast quantities of treasures. The questions we need to ask is how important are these treasures to their people, cultures, and land? Many argue that the contemporary role of museums is to recognise the vitality of living Indigenous cultures and be a platform for their future maintenance, development, and revitalisation. I totally agree. This transformational agent has been described by Stephen Weil as being a shift from being about something to being for somebody. Museums should democratise themselves and their collections. Museums should be dynamic centres for cultural revitalisation and revival. Museums can play more of an active role and not a passive duty of care. As the National Museum, we have to address our past and play more of an active role in the lives of our communities and contemporary society. It's my pleasure to share these perspectives to you all today. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Art Gallery in Kamiuk in Winnipeg, Canada. Kamiuk is Canada's new Inuit Art Centre, and it has given us the opportunity to shift our eyes to the north. The WAG houses the world's largest collection of contemporary Inuit art, and it comprises carvings, prints, drawings, textiles, photography, and new media. And it's supported by an unparalleled record of exhibitions, programs, exhibitions, and research. And to celebrate the art and to honor the people who created the work, the WAG built Kamiuk. This is a center for exhibitions, research, learning, studio practice, and art making. And it's a bridge, enabling people from the north and south to learn and work together. It's a gathering place, a community hub for exploration, advancement, with art serving as a lens on the Arctic. In developing the plans for Kamiuk, the new Inuit Art Center, I've often thought about the idea of the new museum model, not just what it looks like, but how it feels, communicates, and functions. The words that best describe this model are catchwords like Northness, the new future, shared values, letting the objects lead, crafting the value proposition to the outside world, finding the aha moment, and the physical manifestation of many conversations being the new museum. It's that one that has become crystal clear as a validation of the forward-looking path that this new museum is the physical manifestation of many conversations across Canada, the North, and North America. And with these many conversations, I think of the colored pencil drawing entitled Drum Dance by the Baker Lake artist Luke Unguhudlik. It was done in 1970. And in this elegant drum dance composition, the people radiate around the yellow drum, and their faces form a ring around the edge of the drum. The image that Unguhudlik has created here really is perfectly aligned with the way in which the constituents and the stakeholders around the Inuit Art Center came together with respect, understanding, and common purpose. Throughout the program and stakeholder development, the architectural design, and the building of Kamiuk, I've been inspired and challenged to reconsider the template for the new museum in the 21st century. That new museum, it's still a building, but its function and mandate far exceed any physical structure housing the collection, the exhibitions, and the programs. This new museum is really about dialogue. It's about exploration, reconciliation, alongside the still very vital tasks of collecting, preserving, and exhibiting. The museum reflects, responds to, and it is the community. And it's the place where the acts of invitation and welcome and engagement thrive, enabling us to be relevant, impactful, and sustainable. And the value proposition begins with art and the art maker, but it is expanded to reflect multiple voices in the sectors that have come to define contemporary cultural thought. Art is one of our oldest universal languages, one of the first and last ways we communicate with each other. Before letters and words, before even vocabularies and dialects, there has been a visual means in which thoughts, emotions, and ideas are documented. And for centuries, art has been the cultural expression of mankind. Art is a living force, capable of imparting, responding to, and shaping ideas and perspectives. Art needs more places in our city, in our country, where it can flourish, be seen, enjoyed, studied, shared, leading to the prospect of opening people's minds to new ideas and new ways of thinking. And with its exhibitions and programs, Kamiuk is transforming the public experience of art, establishing new pathways to understanding and appreciation. Kamiuk is where the story of Indigenous art can be revealed. Its reviewers launch their own expeditions to the Arctic. Inuit art can inform and motivate kids and youth, deepening their understanding of our relationship with the North and its people. Increased opportunities for virtual connectivity bring students face-to-face through new learning streams, innovative teaching, and training initiatives. The new museum is a creative, evolving conversation, almost like a map, and it's led by the values, the stories, and the communities that define these areas of the Canadian Arctic. The exercise is at the heart of the museum today, fostering new voices and narratives to ensure the Winnipeg Art Gallery and Kamiuk remain relevant and meaningful in its purpose and plan. Kamiuk is a transformative place led by the images, the stories from the art, the people, and the land, including the architectural team seen here in this image that traveled across the Arctic with me to meet people, to see communities, and to watch art making. Linking North and Southern Canada is at the heart of the center's mission, and this was understood by Michael Maltzin, seen here on the left, the key architect for the new center. And then a few shots here of our travels and the slow development of the actual design for the new center. But through regional and national and international partnerships, the new center has become and responds to what is going on in the North, what they're speaking about, what they love, and what they're inspired. The forms, the colors, the textures, the scale of the North comes to life in the new center in the South, called Kamiuk. The development of the new center is grounded in strong partnerships with Indigenous and non-Indigenous stakeholders. This little sketch produced by Michael Maltzin was the first kind of idea, concept of what a center may look like, feel like, and become. This center is at the forefront of a cultural renaissance in Canada, where we're looking and recognizing the importance of Indigenous art and culture as a bridge to the past and the future. And together we are responding to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation's Commission, specific calls to action for museums. Indigenous leaders and perspectives are helping guide all aspects of our operations within the center. This process has been led by an Indigenous Advisory Circle, including members from all 4 regions of the Inuit, as well as First Nations and Métis representatives. The WAG has engaged Inuit birthright organizations, governments, associations, arts organizations to ensure the center is a place where Inuit feel welcome and inspired. I recall a conversation a few years ago with the editor-in-chief of Canadian Art Magazine. 3 questions were asked about the new museum. What should it look like in the future? How will we get there? And what is stopping us? Well, what does it look like? It's an evolving conversation. And these are shots here taken from Michael Maltzin's studio in Los Angeles, United States, that really began to embody the idea of the new center. How do we get there with this new center? Through respectful dialogue led by the values and stories that honor all who are involved, all of the stakeholders. What's in our way? really only the traditions and templates that have kept us back and maybe defined the pathways in the past. This is what must change in order to foster new voices and ideas. The WAG holds in trust the world's largest collection of contemporary Inuit art, close to 14,000 pieces. We produced over 175 exhibitions. We've published more than 60 books on the subject. It's an unprecedented record, but that's not enough to build a new Inuit Art Center. To celebrate the art, to honor the people who've created these works, we embarked on a dialogue with the North and the people to ensure Kamiuk reflected and embodied them. The new museum is still a building, but its infrastructure is much greater than any one form or edifice. And I love the Luke Ungohadlik drawing again that shows us how a circle came together, everyone at the table with an equal voice, to ensure we were preserving, celebrating, and creating the center in their honor. This is a place for exploration, and it's also a place for reconciliation. Kamiuk is a collection of objects, ideas, and people. It's been a personal journey for many, including myself and my family, and all of the staff and board at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. This is the place where the acts of invitation, welcome, and engagement thrive. The value proposition may begin with the art and the art makers, but it now includes many voices, perspectives, and agendas that have come to define what contemporary art is. Art is a living force, it's dynamic, and it's in a world capable of imparting, responding to, and shaping ideas and perspectives. And in this vibrant global exchange we call cultural democracy, Kamiuk is at the center. Kamiuk is a center for exhibitions and research and learning, studio practice. It's a bridge, enabling people from the North and South to meet, to learn, and work together. It's a gathering place defined by Indigenous principles and voices. Northern engagement has been critical to developing the new center and its exhibitions and programs. An all-Inuit guest curatorial team led the inaugural exhibition, Inuwa, at Kamiuk. And here we have the four curators with the lead curator, Dr. Heather Gugliorte, on the right. This team represents all regions of the Inuit Nunga, the Inuvialuit region, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut. Art commissions, artists in residence, cultural worker training programs, and internships have been developed at Kamiuk in partnership with the government of Nunavut, Arctic College, and the Inuit Heritage Trust. The community gallery at Kamiuk is dedicated to different communities throughout the year so they can highlight their work. The WAG continues to build relationships in all Inuit regions, as well as the rest of Canada, to ensure the WAG is serving national interests. We are working with governments, birthright organizations, art associations, institutions, schools and colleges, and the private sector to develop programs, exhibitions, and research element that will allow us to elevate and profile Inuit art. The WAG is a partner in major social sciences humanities research council of Canada grants in conjunction with the University of Winnipeg and Concordia University, where we are building a blueprint to bring more Inuit into careers as arts workers. This project is focused on creating and facilitating training and employment opportunities in the North and the South, and the training takes place at the WAG and Kamiuk with the participants. The Nunavut and WAG collections are being used as a tool to train young people and cultural workers in partnerships with the government and the Heritage Trust. The programs that have been piloted continue to bring young people from the North to the WAG to learn from the collections as well as from their elders. The WAG commissions and works with artists, creating new works. More than 50% of the population of the 3 Northern Territories of Canada are under the age of 25. So the engagement of young audience is critical. And the WAG and Kamiuk, we work with Cisco, taking it global. We host virtual field trips for schools across the country and the North. A cultural worker training program for Inuit youth is being developed in the North. Formal gallery operation internships take place for all those of Inuit descent, so they get hands-on experience. And this program is being developed with Arctic College, with other post-secondary schools and the governments and Inuit Heritage Trust. The WAG is a conduit for trade opportunities, production opportunities, art commissions between Manitoba and Nunavut. There is a joint business opportunity at so many phases and stages of our work with the North. The gallery shop at the WAG provides new retail opportunities, as well we are commissioning new artworks at all times, including this extraordinary sculpture that was created by Guda Ashuna, who is seen on the left. The WAG participates in international, national, and regional conferences, trade shows, and symposia, and we also celebrate young, emerging, mid-career, and senior artists, including Abraham Angik Rubin and his amazing polar bear piece for the new Inuit Art Center. We are providing opportunities to promote Inuit culture through many, many different ways: multilingual interpretation, didactics, and signage, elders in residence programs, connecting Inuit artists and elders, multilingual publishing projects using the collection, and maintaining relationship with all northern schools and universities to ensure their publications are supported and distributed. Among the Indigenous Advisory Circle's first recommendation to the WAG was the renaming or the new naming of the Inuit Arts Center, and they gave us the name Kamiuk, which means in Inuktitut, it is bright, it is lit. And this naming initiative was in direct response to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 13, and Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Calls to Action, number 14. This step was significant, as it was the first instance of the implementation of such an initiative within a major arts organization in Canada. And with the support of the Indigenous Advisory Circle, language keepers, and elders, we came together to establish permanent names for the center and its public spaces. The assembled group came together, represented all 4 regions of the Inanangat, as well as First Nations and Métis representation from Manitoba. The circle gifted us with this name, Kamiuk, and the name was chosen to signify the hope that has always been present among the Indigenous peoples and cultures. The name stands as steps along our path to integrating and honoring Indigenous knowledge, and they reflect an important journey for the gallery. The naming initiative is also another step towards decolonization and ensuring that Kamiuk will be an accessible and an inclusive place for everyone. The new Inuit Arts Center connects people to each other through art. It builds bridges between people as they create together and speak with each other. Throughout the development of the center, called Kamiuk, we have declared loudly that art is a voice. It reflects and shapes our experiences, art heals and inspires, and it fuels understanding. Kamiuk is a welcome to all of these possibilities, and it is bright and it is lit. Thank you. Merci.
Good morning. My name is Kidyaki Shanyang. I'm a proud member of the Haida Nation. I am from the Gakiel's Kigawai Raven clan of Kuna Ilnagai, also known as Skidans. Currently, I am the manager, curator of collections and the lab of archaeology at South Lindenai Saving Things House, Haida Museum, at Kailnagai. I am also an educated and trained archaeologist. I've worked as a professional consulting archaeologist in the field on Haida since 1997. I've also worked as an instructor and guest lecturer for the Haida Institute's Natural Resource and Marine Conservation semesters. For up to 3 months every summer since 2004, I've worked for the Haida Watchman program as a cultural ambassador and caretaker, living in ancient Haida villages as well as cultural sites, and the Skangwai Ilnagai Ninstance UNESCO World Heritage Site, all of which are located within Guayhanas National Park Reserve Haida Heritage Site. South Lindenai Saving Things House, the Haida Museum, is the result of one of the earliest, if not the earliest, steps towards decolonization and reconciliation, also known as Tuliada, making things right in Haida, in the world of Indigenous peoples and museums. A vision of both Haidas and settlers residing on Haida Gwaii. Our Museum Society was formed in 1971, which at that time was called the Queen Charlotte Islands Museum Society. And the original Queen Charlotte Island Museum was opened in 1976. Softlindonai is a place for transmitting our traditional ways of being, or laws, of Yakudang, respect, and Ad Kayang Kungasta, to ask first, upholding Haida Kil and Hadkil, the Haida language, as well as our intangible cultural heritage, and stimulating creativity and community development, in addition to caring for and exhibiting our Haida belongings. Softlindonai was the name given to our museum by elders, community members, and the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program. The museum is governed by the longest-standing all-island board on Haida Gwaii. This board is represented by all communities on Haida Gwaii, both Haida and non-Haida. Today, along with the Skidegate Band Council and Gwaii Parks Canada, we are proud partners in the award-winning Haida Heritage Site at Kaionagai. Our museum's mandate is to promote understanding for all that Haida Gwaii is, with a primary focus on all aspects of historic and contemporary Haida culture. We are also dedicated to supporting and presenting Haida Gwaii settlers' history and natural history, and to building capacity in the fields of arts and heritage. Almost 50 years ago, Softlindonai began with a small collection of Haida and settler works generously donated by local families. Today, we are an internationally recognized facility with an ever-growing collection of ancestral and contemporary belongings, including impressive representations of the island's natural world, an archive rich with history of Haida Gwaii, and an existing annual schedule of art exhibitions and educational programs. Our museum exists today because of the vision, dedication, and hard work of the people of Haida Gwaii, people who know that by working together, good things happen. The Haida Gwaii Museum is located within the Haida Heritage Center at Kaionagai, which was a dream of the Haida people for decades. During the 1990s and early 2000s, framework groups led by the Haida Gwaii Museum staff, Parks Canada, Skidegate Band Council, elders, chiefs, and community members from island communities met and helped design and create the new center. Before any groundbreaking or disturbance of the development site, we were informed and directed by the Haida people to be cautious. The new Haida Heritage Center and Haida Gwaii Museum are located at Kaionagai, or Sea Lion Town, an ancient site home to the Kaiathlanis Eagle Clan, a large and strong family group with a hereditary chief Gothlai, matriarch Gwaganad, and many elders. We house a unique and comprehensive collection of historical and post-contact belongings and archival materials that is made accessible to the public within a setting that invokes the community identities of both Haida and settler communities on Haida Gwaii. Our collection includes ancestral and contemporary Haida works, both utilitarian and ceremonial, settler pieces, audio recordings of Haida songs, histories and stories as given by Haida elders in both Haida and English languages, and a plethora of photographs. Addressing contemporary social issues concerning the politics of land, the environment, and interdependent ecologies, as well as presenting Haida oral histories and politics of cultural heritage and memory within the context of the contemporary are a critical part of the mandate of the Haida Gwaii Museum. We tell ancient Haida histories of creation and natural history and environmental change, and the recent retellings of these stories that are just in the last few years being told by scientific findings. The Haida Gwaii Museum speaks with the Haida voice first, by sharing our culture and worldview and putting forward multiple ways of knowing that empower our once nearly silenced voices. Dominant Western narratives are challenged by including Haida knowledge holders and community scholarly voices, and by exploring community-centered ways of knowing. Throughout the museum, labeling and interpretation is done in Haida Kil and Chudkil, Haida language, from Skidegate and Old Masset first and then English. Elders and fluent Haida and Chudkil speakers from the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program are consulted and provide us with the proper spelling and the interpretation for the museum. Our Haida clans and families are also consulted if the cultural belongings is noted and recorded to be originating from their specific ancestors' clan or town. In our museum, Haida belongings serve many important uses in addition to the usual museum functions of exhibition, research, educational programs, and conservation. For example, some pieces in our collection, whether they are on display or are safely stored in the vault, are used within Haida ceremonies, feasts, and other significant events such as marriages. Belongings such as masks, coppers, box drums, and bentwood boxes are carefully removed from display and storage and made available to our people. We work hard to make these pieces available to our clans and people for special uses such as potlashes, while maintaining our responsibility to care for these belongings and maintain their security. This is a very delicate and serious matter of balancing our responsibility to conserve and preserve the belongings to the standards followed by all museums around the world, and following our cultural practices and wishes of our clans, elders, and people. The underlying message of the museum encourages a holistic, informal learning experience by cutting across traditional museum boundaries that separate our experiences of the natural and cultural world. Haida knowledge, scientific information, natural specimens, oral histories, and art all blend in a fluid and constantly changing exhibit context. Underlying it all is the understanding of our inseparable relationship to the land, sea, and the supernaturals, that which gives Haida Gwaii its incomparable natural and cultural character. In Haida, this is Gina Wadluhan ad Kaugid. Everything depends on everything else, or everything is connected. We have created relationships and have worked with museums from around the world. A great example of our decolonizing work we have done is with the Humboldt Forum in Berlin, Germany, on the Zoo of Cedar and People exhibit, and the revitalization of the Northwest Hall, where the Haida and other indigenous nations showcased their creativity, scholarship, and histories of living cultures. With the Zoo of Cedar and People exhibit, we were involved over the entire process of the exhibit's creation. This included co-curating, text and label creating, and editing, and design. At home, a great example of decolonizing an exhibit is our supernatural exhibit, also known as our oral history exhibit. This exhibit starts with the Haida history about the creation of Haida Gwaii and its people. People come from the supernatural beings that came out of the ocean. Our world began thousands and thousands of years ago. Haida oral histories tell of these beginnings and the many events that followed, including the affairs of the notorious Nunkilstlas raven. This island was nothing but salt water, they say. Raven flew around. He looked for a place to land in the water. By and by, he flew to a reef lying on the south end of the island to sit on it. But the great mass of supernatural beings had their necks resting on one another on it, like sea cucumbers. It was both light and dark, they say. This original story was recorded by John Swanton in 1905, as told to him by a Haida historian. Within our oral history exhibit, we bring together two ways of knowing Haida Gwaii ancient past, Haida oral histories, and recent discoveries in geology, geography, climate studies, and archaeology. Many supernatural beings referred to in the Haida histories are connected to natural events that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. This exhibit area highlights three histories that enrich our experience and knowledge of Haida Gwaii's past. These include Nunkilstlas, raven, Algajud, ice woman, Skulujud, foam woman, and Jilakuns, creek woman. The ancestral beings provide testimony to how far back Haida knowledge of the islands extends into Haida Gwaii's ancient past. Kalgajud talks of the last ice age, when the late Wisconsin Cordilleran ice sheet was at its height from 23,000 to 20,000 years ago, and began slowly receding about 15,600 years ago. By 13,000 years ago, the West Coast mainland, the Hecate Strait, and Haida Gwaii were still largely ice-free. Sea levels are known to have been around 150 meters lower than levels found today. Kalgajut, a supernatural being and Haida ancestress, is said to have led the Haida to lands and territories that were free from the advancing glaciers and provided resources to live by. References to Kalgajut are shrouded in mystery, but the name is preserved and is still used today in Skidegate by many clans, including the Kayath or Gakyel's Kigawai Raven clan of Kuna Ilnagai. Beginning in the 1980s and 1990s, archaeologists began piecing together evidence of very old habitation sites found in intertidal areas from an era when sea levels were considerably lower than today. Skulujud, foam woman, story speaks of a time when these sea levels were lower and then started to swiftly rise, forcing our ancestors to move away farther inland from the rising sea. Science tells us this started around 15,000 years ago, when the glaciers were receding. Within a secondary level of exhibits, backdropped to the three-story modules, the sequence of science, archaeology, and natural history of human history on Haida Gwaii are revealed through stone, bone, wood technology, the changes in tool technology over time, and rare petrified caribou and walrus specimens. Yakudangang, to pay respect, also repatriation. Our ancestors are our relatives, and we have a deep connection to them. We are who we are today because of them. We believe that as long as the remains of our ancestors are stored in museums and other unnatural locations far from home, that their souls of these people are wandering and unhappy. Once they are returned to their homeland of Haida Gwaii and are laid to rest with honor, the souls can rest, and the communities may heal a bit more. The Haida Repatriation Committee, HRC, started around 1995, is a group of volunteers who have taken on the responsibility and are dedicated to the repatriation of the remains of Haida ancestors, cultural belongings, and intangible heritage from global museums and institutions from around the world. The HRC is made up of two official branches, the Skidegate Repatriation and Cultural Committee, located in the village of Skidegate and administered through the Haida Gwaii Museum, and the Old Masset Repatriation and Cultural Committee, located in the village of Old Masset and administered through the Haida Heritage Society. Individually, each community works on behalf of their community, and together we work on behalf of the Haida Nation. The tasks of the HRC are to research and identify where Haida ancestors and cultural belongings are located in Canada, the United States, Europe, and around the world, to contact, to form relationships, and negotiate with institutions for the return of remains and funerary materials, and to see that the remains of the ancestors are cared for with proper respect and brought home in safety for burial on Haida Gwaii. We have been working on repatriation of Haida ancestors for over the past 30 years. Today, the remains of over 500 ancestors have been returned home. This has been our first priority. When this work is complete, we will turn our attention to the work of repatriating other Haida belongings and culture materials. Repatriation is a long and complex process that involves many people. The Repatriation Committee of Skidegate and Old Masset are authorized to do this work on behalf of our nation by the hereditary leaders of Haida Gwaii, the Council of the Haida Nation, the Skidegate Band Council, and Old Masset Village Council. Regular consultation and planning meetings are held with our Hereditary Chiefs Council, elders, and the rest of the Haida communities. And every part of the process is guided by the wishes of the Haida community. Hawa for listening, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Hawa.
All right, Hawa, or thank you in the Haida language, to Sean and to the other presenters who shared their talks with us today. I'm just wondering if we have the panelists online for the discussion, which I think we have some of them. Okay, thank you. Maybe just a couple of remarks before I take questions. I find it particularly interesting to think about these three presentations in the context of what Bruno was saying in the earlier keynote about these sort of three phases for museums of deconstruction, reconstruction, and redistribution. And I think here we've seen some stories of reconstruction. And the reconstruction is something that is new. It's something that's different. It's a generative, creative process that these professionals have gone through with their communities, and as a result, it's something that reflects and suits those communities who build it. And I also thought it was something that brought all three together was the use of indigenous languages in conceptualizing what the new thing will be. So we heard some Haida terms, we heard some Maori terms, we heard some Inuktitut terms, and I think that is indicative that what is being reconstructed, it might be in a building that looks like a museum. Some people might call it a museum, but maybe it's something different and new. So maybe I'll actually just start with my question for the panelists. I was wondering, in addition to what I've just said about language, what the speakers thought were a sort of common ingredient in the three examples that we have. Arapata spoke of Indigenous agency. Sean spoke of the museum as being a process of implementing Haida laws. So I think that there's something to do with cultural sovereignty. But I was wondering if the speakers had any other ideas about something that is a common thread through the three examples.
Kia ora. Could I just kia ora koutou. Could I just acknowledge the president of ICOM and everyone there today? Yeah, look, it's I suppose just to reflect back. Sorry, I've got a delay that I'm speaking, and it's all right. But look, the question there really was it went back to Bruno's keynote speech where he talked about the borders, if you like. And then I think there, towards the end, he talked about relationships and forming meaningful and enduring relationships. For Papa, for our National Museum, that was absolutely tantamount in terms of reimagining our new future. To really imagine something which that involved our people in meaningful ways.
Thank you, Arapata. You were cutting out a little bit, but I think we understood more or less what you were saying. If Stephen is online as well, I was wondering if he had any comments on that question too.
The most interesting thing about Kamiuk was the entire groundwork laid by the Indigenous Advisory Circle, but it was made up not just of Inuit leadership and elders, but also representation from Treaty 1 and the Métis homeland. So it was a really interesting intersection of Indigenous languages stakeholders, because Kamiuk at the Winnipeg Art Gallery is located in the south of Canada, where the Indigenous leadership is First Nations and Métis. But there was this remarkable coming together through ceremony, through engagement, and then ultimately the Sacred Naming Circle, when they decided that the most powerful element of this new project was light, and hence, of course, the name Kamiuk, which means it is light. But one other factor is following the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action for how we not just name buildings, but look at the objects within them. And this also, we undertook a major renaming project for many, many objects within the collection. So what we could never have anticipated here was the convergence of a number of Indigenous perspectives on the role of the museum simply as a dialogue, a place for dialogue, which was, I think, the most powerful thing beyond any bricks and mortar initiative here.
Thank you very much. I was also wondering, following Bruno's keynote as well, and also we heard in Arapata's talk this sort of history of the institution as developing after a phase of political advancements for Maori people. I wonder if in the three sort of phases that Bruno presented on deconstruction, reconstruction, and redistribution, in your institutions, how much of each of those would you say that you're doing? Is it a continuum? Are you in one or the other phase? Maybe I'll start with Arapata here.
Yes, look, I think there is absolutely we were in a deconstruction and to recreate our future, but we're in a constant state of really self-reflection, I suppose, in terms of looking at ourselves, what we're doing, and to imagine something that will align strongly with Māori Indigenous futures. And we're not complacent there. We know that museum practice and tradition is very rigid, and that's part of the challenge going forward, where we've got practice and tradition with hundreds of years, if you like, and but no, look, it's been healthy. Just recently, we established a new strategy which would over the next 20, 25 years, and part of that was being raising more explicit and upfront about owning our past, because we know that healing, reconciliation is a long process, and to empower our people in ways which connect and have value to our community. So, yeah, for us, it's a continuous process.
Thank you very much. Stephen, do you have any comments on that particular question? Is the museum more in the deconstruction phase or the reconstruction phase, or a little of both?
Because it's really a continuum, and I find the first 5 years of our project, even in terms of the planning, was largely unpacking, discarding, rethinking templates, pedagogies for education, for curatorial. And then the biggest shift in construction began with the reconstruction of the curatorial teams and bringing in a number of Indigenous curators, educators, facilitators. And that slowly displaced and created a very new environment. But the deconstruction continues with every project we do. And the building, as new as it is and as amazing as it is as a design, it is simply has become a forum for this constant rethinking of what is the role of the museum in our city. And even the idea of indigenization and decolonization, as understood by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, are different. But at the WAG Kamiuk, they're coming together in an incredibly positive and I would say foundational way.
Thank you. So we have a question, a couple of questions from our online audience. This question is being put to Stephen, but I'm wondering if both of you could maybe address the question of youth engagement in the region, and asking for any suggestions on engaging schools or other educational institutions. I think youth engagement is a really important question in these fields, so maybe we can start with Stephen.
It's a huge part, not just the K-12 school curriculum within Canada and in the South, but because we are so physically removed from all of the Inuit communities in the Canadian Arctic, aside from the urban Inuit, we have a very robust program through Cisco, taking it global, virtual, a constant dialogue with them. We also have a number of high school, post-secondary programs where students come down, kids come down for residencies, and then we go up. But I would say the learning has got to be as fluid as possible, using both the physical engagement as well as virtual engagement. And over, we're looking at what are the best technologies, the speeds, the ways to accommodate these communities in the North with our South. And it's a bridge, and we're not the hub, we're just one spoke in this wheel.
Thank you. Arapata, do you have any comments on youth engagement with your museum?
Yes, it's very similar. It's we actively work with a large number of tribes and sub-tribes in Malaya throughout New Zealand, and what's becoming really, really obvious is the need to actively train and looking for succession planning for intergeneration, the passing of intergenerational knowledge. So part of our mandate and the work that we do is we try and help with assist in raising the capability of our community so that they can actually empower themselves to realise their cultural development aspirations. But no, we do actively work with many of our tribes in our learning, both within and to public, but just as strongly our outward facing directly with Inuit. That's a really strong focus. We're working actively with a large number of tribes to develop their languages, and part of that is actually through internships, transfer, and taking our people out into amongst them there to raise their skills and abilities, because that's the best thing I think anyhow, is that helping and assisting our people there so that they can actually have the skills themselves to work and plan the future.
Thank you. So youth empowerment in addition to youth engagement. So I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to put it to the audience here, actually. If anyone has any questions, please don't be shy for any of the speakers. Unfortunately, Sean had a bit of an emergency and couldn't be with us today. But if you have, please, any questions, let me raise your hand, or no? Okay, then I do have one more question from the chat, and this will be our last one. The question is about touring exhibitions, which seem to be an important role in the success of Te Papa. What would some suggestions or lessons from museums who want to use exhibition exchange or tours to bring changes to their museums? So perhaps this is a good question for Arapata.
Yes, I think so. And then the immediate one that I can think of is when we had a touring exhibition called Wales Tohara. And through that exhibition on Wales, we had 18 different cultural narratives of tribes throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand, who contributed to it. So it expressed both Western science if you like, but also our deep Indigenous knowledge. When we undertook the repatriation, which was one of the largest from the Natural History Museum in New York, it was great to hear the president of their museum say, when they took the exhibition, they were a bit nervous because of the cultural narratives. But when they, afterwards at the repatriation of our tupuna, they noted how successful it was, and in terms of the attendance of the attendance numbers. But then they sort of, it actually made us think about the notion of Western science, and by association, the relationship of First Nations in and around the New York precinct. To me, that just filled my heart, because I think what touring exhibitions can have is actually they can take the culture, the people with those exhibitions in a way which meets other Indigenous First Nation cultures, and it's you take the integrity of the people and the culture with you, and I think in particular it has to be a good thing, because my experience with many museums is that and Bruno sort of expressed it really, really strongly there. It hasn't been in their psyche. There's been just a very strong dominant tradition and practice where just this year the New Zealand government, we acknowledged Matariki, our Indigenous Māori New Year, as the first national holiday in New Zealand, which is as a national holiday in New Zealand. That's fantastic, because we launched it at Te Papa because it really acknowledges the integrity and the mana and the deep of our Indigenous knowledge system. And I just sort of think with touring exhibitions, it's a powerful way in which to take the culture and the people and share that throughout the world.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you. I'm just very conscious of the time, so I'm respectful here.
Yeah, I'm also conscious of the time. Maybe with that, we will wrap up. Thank you very much to the speakers who joined us, in particular Stephen, who's joining us at a very strange hour, I think. Thank you very much for your presentations. And with that, I believe we are headed for our lunch break here. So thank you very much.
Okay, this is the end of this morning's knowledge sharing, and please move to the Lehu Hotel for lunch, and we will continue the seminar at 1:30, and don't forget to come back and join us. Thank you. 我们上午的分享到此结束，请大家移步乐乎楼用餐。我们下午的分享是1点半开始，请大家准时参加，谢谢大家。